Welcome to Generations, a show which helps people 50 and better lead happy, healthy, and productive lives. Our host today is Nadia Jordana, and here's Nadia.
Hello and welcome to Generations, the classic edition. I'm Nadia Jordana, and co-hosting with me today is Diane Winkler. Welcome, Diane.
Thank you very much.
It's so great to have you here today.
Thank you.
And we have a special guest, Gloria VanDemmeltraadt. Gloria has written 3 books that I'm aware of, and she's also a hospice volunteer and worker. And in the process of that, tell me, or correct me, Gloria, you have taken numerous life stories and oral histories. Is that correct?
That is certainly correct. I have, over the past 5 or 6 years, when I started this process, I've done at least 70 stories. We call them heritage writing, oral histories, life stories. They're called by different names, but it's capturing one's memories. And I have done this for older people, hospice patients, as well as other older people. And it's an exciting, wonderful thing to do on my part, as well as the part of the person who's telling their story.
I think so. And today, what we're going to do, which I think is going to be really fun, Diane has agreed to be your subject, and you are going to give us a demonstration of the process of taking an oral history. Maybe you could mention a few of the high points of what someone needs to know before they might want to do this with a family or friend at home.
That's right. One of the things that it's important to think about who's going to be reading, watching, or listening to this history. Is it for my family, my friends? Usually those are the people that are going to do it. If it's for if it is someone like a famous person, you're going to want to publish it in a book, or it would be out there for more people to see. Normally, it's for your family and friends. And Diane, I'm presuming that's who it would be for?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. And there are how many children?
We have 5 of our own and 10 grandchildren and 6 great-grandchildren.
Oh my.
That keep us, as I said, happy and broke.
Happy and broke. That's great. That is
what a treasure
great.
this is going to be today. And I'm going to take mental notes as I step back and give the floor to you two as you do this, because I intend to, at some point very soon, do the same thing with my mother and maybe even a favorite aunt that I have. So take it away.
Oh, how nice. Thank you.
Wonderful. We're going to be asking questions about your history, where you were born, grew up. It's good to think about values. Sometimes gifts we were given throughout our lives, that's something to think about. Lessons, special friends, and memories of family members, grandparents, parents. That's the kind of thing we're going to talk about.
Okay, now we're going to move on to the actual demonstration of the taking of the oral history. Gloria will be doing that with Diane. We are going to pause for just a moment, bring in another camera, which will be part of the demonstration. So if you see that camera there, you'll know that it is part of what we're doing with this. So let's pause for just a moment and get set up for the interview.
Diane, Tell us when you were born and where, please.
I'm Diane Winkler, and I was born in Mankato, Minnesota on October 2nd, 1931.
Were you born in a hospital or at home?
I was born in a home.
Where was that?
That was way back when the hospitals weren't very available where we were living.
Was it in the country? Where was this home?
The home was in downtown Mankato.
What were your parents' names and what did they do?
My father was Quentin Hartwick, and he was a musician. And my mother was Kathleen Klein Hartwick, and she also was a musician. And she was a violinist, and my father played drums.
Do you know how your parents happened to meet, both being musicians?
And my father was a musician, and he played drums for Lawrence Welk. And my mother was a concert violinist in New York. And they were both on the stage at the same time because they asked my mother to sing. And that was the most exciting thing for her because she had never sung before in a big audience.
How did they happen to end up in Mankato, Minnesota?
Mankato was the place where most of the bands came because they had a very, very large area where they could perform. So most of the bands, and also there were two other people that were violinists with my mother, and they were also on Broadway at the time, but they were requested to come here.
How exciting.
Very.
Childhood must have been very interesting.
Well, interesting is an unusual word for me because as a child, I really missed a lot of childhood because of the places that they performed at and all the different areas that I never had a friend, and I had never, ever had a school that I could call my own.
Very unusual childhood. Tell us about the earliest memory you have about being a little girl.
My earliest memories as a child were with my grandfather. And he and my grandmother lived in Springfield, Minnesota. And they were the people that started my life as a person that was not always welcomed.
And why did you not feel welcomed?
Well, as far as the actual reasoning, I don't know exactly. But it is something that I felt I was in the way because they had a family that was living with them, and I really was in the way because I overheard them speaking one day. They said, "How come we have to wash her clothes and feed her?" So that made me feel I certainly wasn't wanted. So the only person that would take me out into the farm, fields, and I enjoyed so much was my grandpa.
What did you call your grandpa?
I really had picked up a name, and my family said, "Where in the world did you get that?" And I couldn't say the other part of the name, so I called him Bumpa.
Bumpa. Mm-hmm. Diane, tell us about your school days. Your school days might have been difficult with traveling parents, and where you lived most of the time, maybe in elementary school.
I loved going to new schools, but there again, I felt very lonesome because I didn't have any friends and I didn't know the teacher. And I went, but one particular day, I came out of the school and I didn't know how to get back to my grandpa. I had no idea, and I remember how frightened I was. But I figured it out, and apparently it came out right because I found his car. And then I was feeling much better.
Tell us about living with your grandparents. Your parents were gone and you were living with your grandparents, and how that felt, having your parents gone, but you were going to school there.
How I felt when they were gone is a feeling that most children maybe have experienced, but I always had it because I had no one really to visit with. And as far as the areas where it was, I had no idea where I was. So I was just a 6-year-old trying to find her way.
Tell a story about how long this lasted, and when did your parents finally settle down? You finally had a home together?
Well, a home together was something that I never had, ever. And what the story is about that is, in the summertime, my mother would put me on a train, and then I'd have to sit with all the conductors. And I can remember that I was getting hungry and I didn't have anybody to ask for a candy bar. I was absolutely so frightened. And then when I arrived, there was my Bumpa, and he took care of me from there and took me to their home.
Tell us about your teenage years in high school and after high school.
My teenage years were lots of fun. I was in an awful lot of things in the school, and I enjoyed it. And as I got older, I realized that I missed an awful lot of information because I was out of the classroom all the time. And it kind of came back to haunt me. So it was after high school. No, I'm going to change that. During high school, I decided I had to have a job. And I was 14 at the time. And my mother was in the middle of a very bad divorce. And so I knew I had to help her. And what I did is I lied about my age, and I went down to Woolworth's dime store, and there was a couple other people there that were from my school also. And when I got the call the next day, I was the only one that got hired. And of course they said, "Do you have a birth certificate?" And I said, "Oh, I don't think so." And they said, "Well, I think you better produce one." I said, "Well, I'll try." And I never produced one.
So they never knew how old you were.
No.
Tell us how long that lasted, and what came next. Where did you go after the high school years?
After high school years, I was very involved with being a majorette and finding places to go that would accept someone who was working at that time 3 jobs. I worked at a bingo parlor until midnight on Saturday night. I worked at a place where all these beautiful furs were, and I had to take them apart. And that was my job. And then on the weekends, I did babysitting, and I did everything I could to go ahead and get some money because I knew my mother needed money. I helped my mother with money so she could go to school, as because of her position as a violinist, she had nothing to rely on to make any money so that she could live.
Let's skip ahead and find out how you met and married your husband. I know you have a family.
How I met my husband is at graduation from Harding High School. There was 7 young girls, and we had a cabin. One of the parents had a cabin, and we asked the guys if they wanted to come up, and we had old rattle-trap cars that were just, I don't know how they ran, but we went up to a dance product, and this place was I didn't know anything about it, but here we were, 7 or 8 young ladies in a place we've never been to before, and there was a man there that was dancing, and I love to dance. I enjoy dancing. And he went by the chair that I was sitting in, and he threw an empty gum wrapper at me. And that should have made me realize that he should have had gum in it. So I just couldn't figure him out. I just thought, well, who do you think you are? Well, as time went on, when I got back home from the cabin, he asked for my telephone number, and I just said, it's in the book. That was it. So weeks later, then he called.
So tell us about getting married to him. What kind of wedding you had, where was it, and when?
When I got married, I had to do the complete wedding myself, as then Lou was in highway patrol school. And my mother was busy with business, and I had to do the whole thing myself. Don't ask me how I did it, because I really got everything done, including my dress, including everything. And my family was wondering, you know, what's going on with all this? And I didn't get the help. I needed support, and I didn't get it. But the things that I set up, I thought were perfect, because we got married in the cathedral, and I thought I'd never get down the aisle. And my little brother was the one that gave me away, John. And it was just very, very scary for just about everybody. And we just thought that we couldn't take a honeymoon because he was in school. So there I was. And prior to, during the ceremony, I realized that I did not tell a choir to come and sing. That was one boo-boo that I surely made. So there had been a wedding before me, and I ran up the stairs at the cathedral and said, would you please, please do another wedding for me? And they said, how come? I said, because I didn't realize that I was supposed to engage you. And they said, okay, tell us what you'd like to hear. And I said, anything at all. And then I ran downstairs and I thought, how did I forget that? But they did it for me. So I was lucky.
Can you talk about the most exciting thing you've done in your life? What do you feel is the most rewarding thing you've done during your lifetime?
When I was growing up and I found out what a microphone was for. And that's exactly what started me off, because I liked being in front of people. I enjoyed what I was doing, and I would announce the songs to the people on the radio, and then I would get to say hello to my grandparents, and I was standing on an apple crate.
Standing on an apple crate, how exciting. Through lifetime, what are some of the involvements that you've had in later life? You have, talk about having your children and they're growing up perhaps?
Well, the story about growing up with the children is they were my life. I loved a family, and we had 5 beautiful kids, 3 queens and 2 kings.
Very nice. Now in your entire retirement years, Diane, what are you doing to keep yourself busy, and what are your fun times and exciting things you're doing?
Well, my most exciting things that I feel every day is doing family trips. And as I thought about it after I packed 5 bags and all the things, is it really worth this? There was so much work then to plan for 7 people. But the more I did it, the more I understood what I needed, and I didn't have to take 20 suitcases. I only took 10.
Diane, in speaking to your family, giving this oral history, what do you want them to know, or do you have lessons learned through life that you would like your family to know?
I would like them to know how very proud I am of my family. They all had a good education, they all had very good jobs, and they all married people that both Dad and I really liked.
Oh my.
We're back. And wow, that was fascinating to watch. It was a little bit hard for me to keep quiet. I wanted to get into the conversation and add some things. So great to see how the process goes along. Diane, you were great. And Gloria, if you had to say a tip or a pointer to someone who wants to do this with a family member, what would you say would be a good takeaway?
A good takeaway would be to think about life in stories. Think about it in chunks of time and activities. Young childhood, school years, high school, after that, middle years, families growing up, later years. So think of it in chunks of time and tell stories about that time.
I'd have to say, too, if a person could take notes, and the ideal would be if they kept a diary or a journal.
Yes.
But if there are major stories along the line, I think it would be wonderful if a person would remember to take notes. We don't, though. I know we don't. Most of us don't. But it would be a good thing, wouldn't it?
Yes, it would. Another thing that helps is looking at pictures. Looking at pictures and thinking about those pictures. Who was there? Who was not there? What was the day like? What was the occasion? And tell a story about that photograph, about that picture. And you could show your picture and talk about it.
Diane, how did this feel doing this, and what did you come away with?
I came away with something that is very important to me, that I do have a really good life. And what I've done is I've let the bad things leave me completely, and I go on and pick the good things that were my family and our relations and our friends all do. And that helps me to learn, and that's what I'm here for.
I think that's great. It culminates in the memory of the good things come to the top, don't they?
Yes.
Yes, they do.
They really do. Well, thank you for watching. This was an interesting show today, and come back and see us again next time.
Hello, this is Michael Rosberg. I'm the Director of Generations and a retiree of St. Paul Parks and Recreation. Welcome to my deluxe editing suite. I hope you enjoyed the previous episode of Generations as much as I did. Personally, I found it to be very thought-provoking. And since we still have a moment, or more exactly about 2.5 minutes, I thought I would share a few thoughts with you about the subject of doing oral histories. The history of families, and of course human history as a whole, extends backward into the fog of time. Even the past 3 or 4 generations, about whom we have increasingly less information, are but a drop in the bucket of our direct ancestors, about whom we know nothing. Not their occupations and hobbies, tragedies and joys, what they believed, what they looked like, or who they loved, hated, and befriended. Wouldn't it be fascinating to travel back in time and visit with people who are directly responsible for our being here in the first place, and relatives of theirs who may remind us of ourselves? In my case, what I would give for the kind of glimpse an oral history would provide into the life of my great-uncle Bill, who passed away a dozen years before I was born. I know just a few facts about him and have just a few mementos from his life, but have long been engrossed by what little I know. He was a farmer who became a lawyer, maintained a correspondence, it is said, with Clarence Darrow, and did some freelance writing. He had quite a collection of books, which were mostly destroyed when his house mysteriously burned to the ground just after his death. Only one of these books, a philosophical tract called The Ego and His Own, written in 1844 by Max Stirner, has slipped down through time and now sits on my own bookshelf. How valuable it would be to see, hear, or read a first-hand account of my great-uncle Bill's life he had produced himself and set safely aside for someone in the future like me to examine. Oral histories today give us all that opportunity. The one you record will not be for yourself, but for those descendants of yours who want to know more about who they are and why they are the way they are, by learning about their ancestors. Here are 3 internet sites you may wish to visit for more information about this topic. First, our guest's website, gloriavan.com/services. Second, an article in Wikipedia called Oral Histories. And finally, an organization dedicated to the production of oral histories, www.oralhistory.org. Thank you for watching our show.